I'm delighted to be here to be part of the launch of the Global Transport and Logistics Research Group. I'm also delighted to see the stellar panel assembled for today's event, and on behalf of RMIT, I thank the panellists for making the time to be with us today. I too would also like to acknowledge the traditional Indigenous custodians of the land on which we are meeting virtually today, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Next slide, please, Sarah. Thank you. So RMIT as a university is committed to interdisciplinary research that is not only excellent, but also creates value for others, and in so doing helps us to achieve the UN's 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. We are collaborative and inclusive in our style, emphasising core values around imagine, agility and impact. Our 8 enabling capability platforms, which are our thematic university-wide research foci, are crucial to this agenda of impactful research. They were established in 2016, and these are research platforms that coalesce multidisciplinary teams from across the university to co-design transformative research that addresses real-world problems. For example, the Transport at RMIT network is driven by the Urban Futures Enabling Capability platform and aims to bring together transport researchers and educators from across RMIT to enhance, promote and deploy the university's multi and interdisciplinary capability in transport. The Global Business Innovation Information Systems, which is focused on digital enablement and advanced manufacturing platforms, also need to incorporate considerations involving transport, logistics and supply chains. Next slide, please, Sarah. So the platforms have now turned their attention to the unprecedented impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, in which transport, logistics and supply chain challenges have, as has been mentioned by Julie, have been magnified. For example, the vulnerability of having a heavy reliance on global supply chains has been dramatically exposed in the Australian context. In many areas of supply, we're looking at what is the appropriate amount of sovereign capability that we need to possess in order to mitigate risk. RMIT's ECP post-COVID-19 restart initiatives curate our unique expertise to address some of these challenges and many others through meaningful co-design with industry and community. The restart initiatives are a greener start, enabling environmentally sustainable futures, a healthier start, enabling resilient health systems and populations responsive to major health challenges, a digital start, enabling social innovation, inclusion for digital futures, a better work start, enabling effective, resilient, ethical and responsible businesses for future workforces, and a fairer start, enabling a more inclusive and equitable future Australia. The transport and logistics research area is one of the most active and productive research areas within the College of Business and Law and forms a large part of the Better Working Start Research Start initiative as part of our response to COVID-19, and in particular us beginning to focus our attention on what the recovery phase may look like. That research group provides thought leadership in many areas. In particular, I anticipate that they'll be providing thought leadership on recovery and growth strategies for our economy and for our society more broadly. Also, we always bear in mind that we need to develop high impact strategic partnerships and create effective pathways to impact for new solutions that support what we anticipate to be recovery and regrowth. Next slide, please, Sarah. So it is therefore my great pleasure to officially launch with Julie the Global Transport and Logistics Research Group, established in 2019 as one of the strategic research structures within the College of Business and Law, led by Associate Professor Victor Gekera and a team of highly qualified, experienced researchers in the college, including Professor Babak Abbasi, Professor Pam Chetri, and Associate Professor Richard Tay. The group aims to establish strong research networks internationally and drive active, impactful research collaborations, and to understand the practical challenges in global transport and logistics and develop solutions that capitalise on emerging opportunities. Congratulations to Victor and the team for officially forming this group to focus on transport and logistics and the complementary area of supply chains as an ongoing research area within RMIT. Through the uncertainty and disruption around us, we continue to witness extraordinary innovation as well as the adaptiveness of our global community during this time. I'm so pleased that this group will be part of the Better Work Start component of the COVID-19 Restart initiative to achieve excellent research outcomes of relevance to the communities in which we live. Our commitment as RMIT to shaping the world with impactful research has never been more important. Thank you, Victor.
Thank you very much, Callum, for those encouraging words and for launching our research group. I really appreciate that. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to take a few minutes to introduce the research group. It's a really great pleasure for me, therefore, to introduce the Global Transport and Logistics Research Group, which we will refer to as a GTL. The group was established in 2019, and it was a culmination of recognition of the great research work that was already happening in the college, and especially within the School of Accounting, Information Systems and Supply Chains. Its aim is to consolidate the research efforts and expertise in the college and elsewhere in the university and provide a platform for active academic and policy debates on the developments and issues that shape the future of the sector internationally. Our commitment, therefore, is to first conduct and disseminate high quality and high quality research that has real impact for policy and practice, to engage strongly with industry in collaborative research and deliver mutual stakeholder value from that research, to create and provide training opportunities for our early career researchers and higher degree by research scholars, to make strong and sustained contribution to theory and knowledge through quality publications, and to build and maintain strong international research networks to enhance the community impact of our research. Next slide, please, Sarah. The group is structured into several streams which represent the overall interest, expertise, and focus for our members. These include a focus on policy and management questions and issues. It includes a focus on technology and the future of work in the sector. It also includes a specific focus on ports and shipping in the context of international trade logistics, and a focus on security and sustainability issues within the sector. As we grow and expand in the coming years, we will expand this list, of course, to reflect a growing membership, expanding industry engagement, and a much wider scope of interest and expertise. Next slide, please, Sarah. One of the greatest strengths of the group is that it's built upon a solid foundation of a nationally leading and internationally acknowledged and recognized supply chain and logistics graduate program within our school and the college. The program brings together some of the best intellectual minds in this area of research, academics who are already internationally acknowledged for their excellent research outputs and impact. These four that you can see in front of you, including Professor Prem Chetri, Professor Babak Abbasi, Associate Professor Richard Tay, and myself, are the founding members of the group who have collaborated on high quality, multidisciplinary research projects for many years before the formation of the GTL. The group's growth and performance will definitely rely and depend a lot on the leadership of these four. Next slide, please, Sarah. The core strength of the group, however, rests in the researchers on your screen currently. Not only are these very good-looking individuals, as you can see, of course, they also represent some of the best minds in transport and logistics research in Australia and are widely acknowledged internationally for their publications, contribution to academic theory and knowledge, as well as industry policy and practice. I am very lucky and very proud to have them working with me as we develop and grow our research in this area. Next slide, please, Sarah. A very important focus of our group, as I said earlier on, moving forward, is to provide training and support for a higher degree by research students in order to develop future researchers. This is the reason why this group is perhaps the most important in our membership. We aim to grow this group, and so far we have a small but very promising cohort which we will aim to build upon in coming years with a lot of support from the college and the school and the university at large. Next slide, please. Thanks, Sarah. And finally, our industry partners. Without the support of these industry partners, we will be unable to function and produce any meaningful work. We will be unable to secure research grants, unable to gain access to research data, and definitely unable to effectively disseminate our research with impact. This that you can see in front of you are some of the organizations that have supported us in our research even before the establishment of this research group. And we shall continue to work very closely with them in order to ensure that what we do and produce translates into real solutions for real industry and real societies. I say thank you for your support so far and look forward to an even closer and more productive working relationship. And with that, I say thank you to all, and should you want to get involved in any way, including membership, please do not hesitate to contact us, and we will build this research area together. What I am going to do now, ladies and gentlemen, is to pass on the event to Professor Prem Chetri, who I introduced earlier on as the Head of Department for Supply Chain and Logistics, and Prem will take us through the rest of the event, including the Q&A. Thank you, Prem.
Thank you very much, Victor. Delighted to be here today. Womanjika, welcome. Good afternoon and warm welcome to the conversation on policies, strategy and sustainability in global transport and logistics. As Victor mentioned earlier, my name is Prem Chetri. I'm the moderator for the panel session today. Few housekeeping requests, if I may. I would like to encourage all of you to pose any questions or comments for the speakers in the chat box. Others may rank those questions or comments by clicking on the thumbs up button. So what I'll do at the end of the day, I'll take those questions and provide the speakers the opportunity to respond to those questions later. The questions which has been ranked heavily would then be got a chance to be given to the speakers to respond. So just a background of the conversation today. Like most other industries, transportation and logistic industry is currently undergoing immense change, and like all changes, this brings both risk and opportunities. New technology, new customer expectation, new market entrants, and new business model that opens. There are various ways the industry could develop strategies to tackle these challenges. Some evolutionary, others more revolutionaries. All this has huge implications for transportation and logistics. Companies are increasingly required to integrate data analytics and social supply chains to provide much better traceability and predictability, not to mention lower cost, smart warehousing solutions that become essential. The implications are clear to all of us. Digital fitness is becoming a must for every logistic company. So the wicked question for the panel today, quite challenging. Will the winners be those who understand how to exploit the whole range of new technology, from data analytics to automation and platform solutions? How should the government respond to those disruptions and industrial transformation which are taking place? How should the labor market react to those rapid pace of automation adoption and digitalization? And we have the perfect panel to discuss these wicked questions. We are really shifting from known unknown situation where risks were unknown to us to unknown and known that come to a situation that are unexpected and they would not be considered. So it's really challenging for all of us. So in this backdrop, I would now like to introduce a speaker who are highly experienced, amazingly innovative and bold in their approaches to drive change through thought leadership. Their work has really shaped the industry practices, influenced public policy, and informed strategy to enhance cost efficiency, work productivity, and more importantly, fairness and social equity. Without further delay, I would like to invite our speakers, Mr. Mike Gallagher, Mr. Mark Dickinson, and Dr. Jan Hoffman. Each of the speakers today will have 15 minutes to present their views on policies, strategies, and sustainability in global transport and logistics. I'll start with Mr. Mike Gallagher, Chief Executive Officer, Ports Australia. The topic you're going to present today is current challenges and future opportunities for the Australian port sector. So just a brief background of the Ports Australia. So Ports Australia is a national peak body representing government and privately owned ports. Formed at the first Interstate Harbour Conference in 1916, Port Australia has provided advocacy, coordination and leadership for over 100 years to sustain port communities while fostering economic, innovative and sustainable growth. Just a brief bio. Mr. Gallagher has held the position of Port Australia CEO since 2017. Before this, he held several positions in the Parliament of New South Wales during his 21-year tenure, including Member of the Legislative Council, Minister for Police and Emergency Services, Leader of the Government, Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Gallagher also worked as police detective after his graduation from the University of New England with a Bachelor of Professional Services. So may I invite, and please join me in welcoming Mike to give his presentation today.
Prem, thank you for the introduction, and Victor, thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. Interesting listening to the opening comments that quite simply reflect on the fact that the problems in the port sector that many of you would have looked at over the years in 2019 was still with us on the dawn of the new year. What we thought would be a clear view towards the coming year in relation to the evolution of those issues with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic most certainly changed our 2020 vision in relation to what we thought the year would look like. Those issues are still with us. They are still alive. And in fact, they're probably, fair to say, more pressing, more critical, and now there is a different focus. So it is entirely consistent with the opening comments that have been made in the context of the presentations thus far this afternoon. Prem, Victor and your team, I'll touch on a couple of subjects that carry through from 2019 to 2020 that most certainly have a different perspective on it, given the COVID situation that we find ourselves in, and the way in which both government and industry are now looking forward with a completely, I'd say, a different or an enhanced view in regards to dealing with these issues. Last year, we spoke quite extensively and have done so for a number of years now on what we consider to be a better utilisation of the Blue Highway. Governments right around the country are successively talking about their investment in infrastructure. The numbers become so big, for many they become unimaginable. They're talking billions and billions of dollars in infrastructure, always focused in on the commuter, always focused in on the movement of freight around the country. And of course, we think that the Blue Highway is already open for business. It already connects with every port. There's very little infrastructure needs to be done to make that more operable than it is now. And therefore, we feel as a maritime nation that it's something that the business community, as well as our elected representatives, and indeed universities such as yours, need to be looking at what do we have to do to take advantage of our location in the world, considering the Blue Highway completely surrounds us. Recently, the government has announced a discussion paper. They're revisiting the issue of coastal shipping. How do we move more freight? Is it possible to do so along the Blue Highway? And how do we go about doing it? Now, of course, this has been a hotbed of discussion, as many of you would know, for many, many years. And back in 2012, the then Labor government embarked upon a series of reforms that they believed would reinvest and invigorate the dying vestiges of the maritime industry in this country. And they believe it would protect jobs. But sadly, that has not occurred. And the numbers of Australian registered vessels continues to decline. The numbers of Australians in the maritime workforce continue to age, with very little confidence of there being a renaissance of the maritime sector, and a general disappointment that the proposals of 2012 have simply not been fulfilled. If you speak to the Labor opposition, they will simply say the plan would have worked had the government of the day kept their eye and focus in on the needs to be constantly fine-tuning these requirements to keep pace with the need. And they would say that sadly the coalition government hasn't done so. If you talk to the coalition government, they will say that the reforms were always doomed to fail, and therefore we're never going to succeed. That doesn't help us. That doesn't help us at all as a maritime nation. And the point that Professor Callum made earlier in regards to the changing dynamic that has occurred with 2020 is that what does COVID mean for a maritime nation that for many, many years has continued to ignore its maritime history and its maritime needs, relying on international trade? What does that mean for government? What does it mean for opposition in terms of reinvigorating an ability for us to be self-sufficient as a maritime nation? Can we do it? Should we do it? Is there really an opportunity to do it? And how would you do it in such a way that doesn't require heavy subsidies? These are questions that government has to deal with. These are questions that industry, the maritime industry, has to deal with as well, as we look for ways to take advantage of the natural waterways that do in fact go right around all of our ports, right around Australia. So I'm happy to touch on that a little bit later, perhaps if people have questions in regards to it. Another challenge for us, as has already been alluded to, and it's not limited just to us, is the technology challenge. Be it automation, which is obviously a significant question for industry and indeed the government right around the country to deal with. How far do you want automation to go? What does that mean with the future of jobs? We actually see the jobs in the port sector, some will go with automation. There's no denying that. But there will also be others created through automation. We are not unique in that regard. That happens right across the world. It happens across all of those who transition to more an automated role. It will see a change in the roles that we see in the port sector. We have a mixture of ports in this country. We have the overwhelming majority are state-owned, owned by state governments. No federal government owns any port in Australia. And we have a number of capital city ports that are owned or leased under long-term leasing agreements by international or indeed domestically based consortia. These are primarily in the container space. Most of you would be very well familiar, of course, with the Port of Melbourne in your home state of Victoria. So there are challenges in that regard, in regards to the further adaptation of automation, in that some terminals do use full automation, others don't, others may use it in part. And of course, the question just comes down to one of efficiencies and the costs, both the cost of introducing the automation and the labour costs involved in maintaining the current systems and the current relationships you have with workers working for stevedores and the likes. Another area that's a real challenge to us and a great opportunity for us is the action from the National Freight and Supply Chain study, which looked at a national data hub. It's bringing together all of the data in the supply chain. And of course, the question will be, who will maintain it for security? And it's our view that it should be maintained by government, because people involved in it, all of the players or all of the actors in the supply chain, will want that confidence, knowing that it is being maintained in as secure a measure as it's possibly capable. Therefore, we do believe it sits with government. But equally, there are a couple of other things that are now starting to gain some momentum. Some of the areas such as, my apologies, I should have actually asked you to change one of the slides there. If you can go on to slide number 2, I realised there I should have actually indicated that. One of the other challenges for us in this area is the common expression or common use term of a single window. And of course, right now, particularly Border Force and its customs responsibilities and Department of Agriculture now really starting to focus in on single window and the need for an efficiency dividend to government by ensuring that there is one single process and not competing processes within government in terms of the roles of customs and imported goods coming into the nation. But that, of course, sits in very, very closely with the National Freight Data Hub. And the other issue that we are pushing up on from the port's perspective is the port community systems. And by that, it's ensuring that all of those involved in the port community are involved in one system that recognises the different technologies, the different languages that companies will and organisations will be speaking with regards to the technology that they're using, but that this data hub has the ability to bring it all into one common language, not dissimilar, as I often say, like the United Nations, where we see people with all different backgrounds, all different languages, all listening intently with the earphones, speaking into the microphones, but of course, hearing the language in such a way that they can all understand exactly what the message is being said by all of the participants across the United Nations discussion. Similarly, that should also apply in regards to the port community systems. Also on this slide, we have the COVID issues. COVID has changed the thinking across government. It's changing the thinking across industry, both in terms of how do we take advantage of this? Is there an opportunity for us to learn from COVID in relation to efficiencies? Are there ways in which we can get things done? Is it the changing nature of work at the port? Is there an opportunity to have dialogue with the unions or indeed non-unionised workforce and indeed communities around things like curfews, working hours, working conditions? Is there an ability for workers to actually translate from one job across to another, provided they have the necessary skills and training, particularly around safety, to be able to do it, to do that new job? These things are currently being discussed as a result of COVID, focusing the minds of all involved in the port sector to ensure that we keep the system working as efficiently as we possibly can. Equally, areas such as the risk to our personnel, pilots, etc., all of those involved in the interaction with incoming international crews, that has significantly changed the focus of ports in and around maintaining a safer, much safer workplace for pilots and those personnel. That whilst it was always there, it now has caused questions to be asked of what we've done in the past, is it the safest way to do it? Slide 3 also recognises, of course, the challenges now and for the future. We do have an ageing workforce in the maritime sector. Over 75% of the workforce are aged over 45. If the government is serious and industry is serious about reinvesting in coastal shipping, for example, to ensure our sovereignty is maintained, and to be able to look after ourselves. What training, what skills do we need for those jobs in the future? It's not going to be a case of simply this is the way we've always done it. We're actually going to have to look at new ways of doing things if we are serious about wanting to maintain or at least invest in the maintenance of an Australian shipping sector. These are political questions. These are political challenges. The Labor government, or Labor opposition prior to the last federal election made it very clear where they were going in terms of a national fleet, a national critical fleet. That was all before COVID. It'll be interesting to see what the coalition's position is in relation to our maritime sovereignty. One other thing I'd like to also raise with you that has been a significant issue for the port sector for many years, and we're now starting to bring it together, and I'm glad you're talking about it in the context of this webinar today, this conference today, is sustainability. And in fact, just recently, I had the great pleasure of launching a world first, I believe, and I've been told by international participants in another organisation that we're involved in, and this is a world first port sustainability strategy development guideline that Ports Australia has released only in the last 2 weeks, and it sets out the steps by which ports around the country should embark upon a consistent approach to sustainability. It's built on an approach that recognises there are going to be horses for courses and right-sized needs for ports in Queensland as opposed to ports in other parts of Western Australia or indeed South Australia or anywhere else around the country. They have different pressures. They have a social licence that clearly needs to ensure that there is a focus in on sustainability, and there's no doubt that this document will be, I think, a very valuable document for ports and other industries in the coming years. Move to the next slide, please. Slide 4 is the role of government. We are most certainly going to need government in the area of coastal shipping if we're going to see a reinvigoration of the Australian maritime fleet and the Australian maritime industry. For ports, we're ecumenical. At the end of the day, we don't favour one form of mode of transport over the other. There are a role for each. But for ports, we need a maritime workforce for our future harbour masters, for those who work in the tugs, those that are pilots, those that are critical to keep a port moving. We need people who have had time at sea and experience at sea. Right now, we rely very heavily on international visas to bring people into the country. But if the government is serious about this as an issue, then they're going to have to rethink their approach to coastal shipping and what they need to do there. Finally, last slide, slide 5, is all about building relationship with universities. What we are now seeing, and I encourage you, is to build that relationship with your local ports, to actually have access to them, to exchange ideas, to be able to grow knowledge both within the university sector, but indeed within the port sector, and bringing together that wealth of experience that, as I've seen by the people who are participating in this forum, and indeed those in your organisation, Victor, you've most certainly got the experience there. I encourage you to build those relationships in the same way that others are currently doing around the country. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Mike. I think something must have happened to Prem and in his network, I suppose. The next speaker that is going to speak to us is Mark Dickinson. Mark Dickinson is the Secretary General of Nautilus International, which is one of the unique unions that cuts across international borders and operates as if it was one single union across cross borders. And Mark has got a lot of experience in the shipping industry and has developed a career starting as a seafarer and has got a lot of great insights to share with us. Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Victor, for that kind introduction and promotion to Secretary General. My name is Mark Dickinson. Yes, as you now know, I'm General Secretary of a small but beautifully formed trade union and professional organisation that is based in the UK. But as Victor has said, we are organised across, we're a transboundary trade union in maritime and shipping, and we have offices and organising bases in the UK, the Netherlands and in Switzerland. We've been around quite a long time, over 170 years, and I've been General Secretary since the new union was created in 2009, 40 years in the industry. And being a Scouser, hailing from the northwest, the Wirral on Merseyside, I've got an opinion on pretty much everything, and that helps in this business. So without much more of ado, I'm going to move quickly through my slides and try and keep to my time. So I want to give you a bit of a seafarer's perspective on this discussion about global transport and logistics, give you some context where they come from, where and for whom they work, consequences for those seafarers. I want to touch on the regulation of shipping, a little bit of history, international standards, and touch then on the impact of COVID-19 on seafarers, on the industry. And in my humble fashion, I want to just give you some observations on some issues that I think need to be addressed, some changes needed, and hopefully perhaps inspire Victor and the team as they go about their work researching what's needed for this great industry of ours. So moving swiftly on. So there's something in the region of 1.65 million seafarers globally, top 5 countries that supply seafarers: China, about 15%, 244,000 seafarers. The Philippines, about 13%, it's about 216,000 seafarers. Indonesia, Russia, and India. So they'd be the top 5. Now, a lot of the Chinese suppliers for their own requirements, obviously a huge domestic fleet and quite a significant global fleet. And so most people view the Philippines as the most important country for supplying labour into international shipping, and alongside Indonesia, Russia, and India too. I think it's important to just the context is that a lot of these seafarers are typically employed on voyage-based contracts. They will serve up to a maximum of 12 months in accordance with the ILO Maritime Labour Convention. That means they normally do about maximum is 11 months because they have to take a month's paid annual leave into account as well. It's precarious and fragmented. The relationship, which I'll go on to explain in a second, with their employer is fragmented, and there's also complex jurisdictional context to bear in mind, which again should become evident as I move through the next few slides. Where do ships and ship owners come from? Well, there's about 22,500 vessels represented, well, just shy of 2 billion deadweight tons. Top 5 countries of ownership of vessels is Greece, 349 million, about 82% of that is foreign flagged. Japan, 225 million deadweight ton, about 84% of that is foreign flagged. China, Singapore and Hong Kong represent a very significant Asian locale for ships and ship ownership. These figures are all courtesy of Jan's organization. Thank you, Jan, for providing those. Just a quick comparison, in the UK, we have about 1,300 vessels, 49 million deadweight tons. Most of that is foreign flagged. We're about 12th in the world. The Netherlands, about 1,200 vessels, 18 million, significantly less, but still quite a high proportion of that is foreign flagged. They're 21st in the world. Switzerland, some of you might be surprised that Switzerland's even got a fleet, but it's a very, when I first took over the union, they probably had about 60 ships registered in Switzerland. It's probably down to less than 30 now. where are these ships registered? So if we take ships over 100 gross tons, which is what UNCTAD uses as its benchmark, there are about 96,000 vessels in the world. So that's all vessels pretty much, approximately 2 billion deadweight tons. Top 3 registered would be Panama, Marshall Islands and Liberia. That's about 40%. These are registers which we refer to as flags of convenience. Probably you're familiar with that term. If you take the top 35 flag states listed in the UNCTAD report that I've referred to, there are 9 FOC states listed. They represent 950 million deadweight tons. That's 48% of the world fleet. So flags of convenience represent the sort of the norm in our industry. They are, in my opinion, and others would share this opinion, others would disagree probably, that it's an abrogation of international law codified in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, Article 91, nationality of ships, Article 94, duties of flag states. These set out the requirements for states to register ships. There's a requirement for a genuine link between the vessel and the country of registration, so that country can effectively exercise jurisdiction and control. And those 2 requirements are absent when we're talking about flags of convenience. What could we conclude from what I've just outlined? Seafarers don't come from the countries where the ships are owned or where they are flagged, registered. Ship owners don't come from where the ships are registered either. There is no effective jurisdiction and control of ships, and that's really important if you think about seafarers in this context and their employment status and the enforcement of their rights under conventions and national requirements. So that's the consequences for seafarers. What about the consequences for shipping regulation? What I would argue is that the growth of flags of convenience over the past, well, certainly since the period since the Second World War, has been a race to the bottom. It's created unfair competition, what we would refer to as social dumping in my circles, and it has externalized many of the costs of shipping, which are not, other speakers will probably refer to that. International standards, what we've seen in the industry, if you look over the timeline that I've referred to, is that you've got a demise of national regulation in favor of international regulation, which by its very nature tends to be minimum standards. One of those re-regulation, as I would refer to, from shift from national to international has been, as late as 2006, what we refer to now as the 4th pillar of global regulation of the shipping industry, and that's the Maritime Labour Convention 2006 as amended to give it its full title. That represents a set of minimum standards. We refer to it as the Seafarers Bill of Rights, but it is essentially at its heart a set of minimum acceptable standards, and it sits alongside IMO conventions such as safety of life at sea, standards of training, certification, and watchkeeping, and MARPOL. Moving swiftly on, Victor. Now, along comes COVID-19, and all the industry's chickens have come home to roost. And if, in case that little colloquialism doesn't translate to the entire audience that's watching these presentations, that's an English saying that means that if your chickens are coming home to roost, someone is suffering the unpleasant consequences of their bad actions in the past. And what we've had is decades of the industry hiding in the shadows. Invisibility was the key. Stay out of sight, leave us alone, give us the tax breaks, give us the subsidies. And ship owners have chosen predominantly to register their vessels in flags of convenience, for limited liability, for light touch and flexible regulation, accessible politicians, and low and probably no taxes at all. The problem is, as we've seen with COVID-19, when things blow up, where do ship owners turn to? They don't go to Panama City, Monrovia, or Majuro for support. No, they're back to their countries of beneficial ownership, or where they are located and based, where they exercise the control from, and they're demanding naval support, they're demanding subsidies and support, they're demanding consular support. Now, in many ways, this is kind of similar to the development of, you know, companies like Amazon, Uber, and even Apple. You know, they have power, they have jobs to offer, they have investment to offer, but they want support, they want investment, they want subsidies, they want encouragement, they want flexibility, and we can see how that has been how that has panned out, certainly in terms of working conditions, which often tend to be 0 hours, flexible, you know, full self-employment, these kinds of things. So if you want that investment and you want those jobs, then it's usually on the terms of those global businesses. It seems sometimes as if it's only fools who pay taxes. And the quote there in front of you is not a quote from me. It's a quote from the boss of Euronav, which is a major tanker operator, and he is lamenting the response, the consequences of COVID-19 on the industry. And he said at a recent industry webinar, very much like this one, very well attended, based in London, the International Chamber of Shipping hosted this event, looking at the crisis and the response. And he says, we've tried to live in the shadows, tried to be discreet, to be forgotten. Nobody wanted to pay tax or be heavily regulated. So we chose tiny jurisdictions like Panama. I mean, this led the editor of the venerable Lloyd's List, that venerable institution based in the UK in London, to reflect that this is one of the most honest statements he'd heard from a ship owner in a long time. Shipping is struggling with transparency and is increasingly required, which is increasingly required from responsible businesses. So, Victor, I just want to move on in the last couple of minutes I've got for my presentation to just sort of reflect on what I've just sort of set up as the background to my presentation. I hesitate to call them solutions. I wouldn't be as bold as to suggest that. Now, essentially what I would think is that the institutions of global regulation are essentially good and robust, but they're not enough. We need to weed out the self-interested. These institutions of global regulation need bolstering, and a frank and open appraisal is necessary of the governance and structures of the shipping industry. This is now more necessary than at any time in our recent history. There's a couple of things I wanted to sort of throw into this conversation, which I think very much chime with the opening comments from Professor Drummond and indeed Mike as well. We need to really relearn and understand the importance of shipping and seafarers to the global and local economies, and indeed regional economies. Nations, especially island nations, and those with coastlines, really need to reflect on shipping and seafarers and its importance to the country. And Mike's comments about the Blue Highway are very pertinent in this respect. Investing in your shipping industry and in your maritime skills is a win-win for the national economy and beyond. Shipping, the alternative of being reliant on others for your shipping needs is strategically suicidal, in my view. Other speakers have mentioned sovereign capability. In the States, there's a big debate about sea strangulation, and in Europe and in the UK, we talk about our maritime resilience. Pre-COVID-19, these were active debates. Now, if you're not having this debate, then it's complete madness. In Australia, you've allowed your industry to decline. It needs to be that needs to be reflected upon, and there is a need for substantive government intervention. If you look back at the UK and indeed the Dutch experience in the past, sort of laissez-faire government policy, where you just allow the market to deliver, is a failed policy. In fact, it's no policy at all. And you look at the UK situation and the Dutch situation, the government has intervened massively to support shipping. It's not enough, of course, it never is, but at least we are still here. We still have substantial maritime skills and a substantial fleet. And indeed, I'm aware that two of the sister unions that I work with, who are based in Australia, the AMOU and AMIP, have made submissions about the need for the government to make a direct intervention to support Australian shipping. Fuel security is the first step that they have argued for, and I would bring that to your attention and commend that to this discussion. I think ship owners need to think about transparency. They need to think about fairness, decency, and the environment. Hiding in tax havens and avoiding scrutiny is no way. And I actually don't think it fits today with society's views, and certainly our young people. Sustainability has been mentioned already in the UN sustainability goals. They're really important. ESG issues are now mainstream. Banks won't lend to the shipping industry if it's not transparent, if governance isn't at the required level. We've seen through the crew change crisis interventions from investment funds, huge investment funds like Fidelity, demanding action, demanding that the industry and governments intervene. We've seen Unilever and other global corporations joining in now. And there are international tax reforms coming into play, which also hopefully, and there is this expectation that this will drive more business, more ships away from small Caribbean tax havens back to registers in countries where there is effective oversight. I'm running a little bit over time, Victor, so I will just probably wind up just there by just ending on this quick point, if I may. Young people are the future for this industry. They want to work for sustainable businesses. I wager that they increasingly won't be voting for politicians who don't see the need to address this broken system. Banks are not going to lend, as I've said. Public opinion is shifting against corporate greed. Now seems the right moment to address these issues, to research as you have set yourselves up to do, and for us to begin this conversation about how we change our industry for the better. So thank you. Sorry, I went a few minutes over. I thought I had plenty of time, but as ever, these things tend not to work out quite that as you'd like them. So I'm going to finish, Victor, with my postcard to the Secretary General of the United Nations in New York. Please give us a better industry. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you very much, Mark. I don't know if we've got Prem back online. Prem, do we have you back online?
Victor, while we sort out that, could I just say that my slides are in the pack for those participating, and the full script, had I been given an hour to speak, is also available. So apologies for rushing through all those slides, but all the details there, and anybody wants to get in touch with me, Google me, I'll be there.
Thanks, Mark. I think Prem is definitely having connection issues, so we will plow ahead, and I'm going to introduce Dr. Jan Hoffman, who is the Chief of Trade Logistics Branch at UNCTAD. And Jan has been with UNCTAD for 15 years and has occupied various positions, including the Chief of Trade Facilitation and Economic Affairs Officer. And prior to this, he worked as the Economic Affairs Officer at the Economic Commission for Latin American and Caribbean, and the Associate of Economic Affairs Officer at the International Maritime Organization. Having graduated with a PhD in economics and at the University of Hamburg in 1994 and worked as assistant professor. Jan has maintained great interest in academic research and continues to work with and support many academics around the world. As I said earlier on, Jan has been a great supporter of ours in our research. So Jan, thank you for coming today, and over to you.
Okay, a wonderful good morning. My camera is on. I hope you can see me. I hope you can hear me. A wonderful good morning from Geneva, early morning. Very happy to be with you. A great event. Happy to share some thoughts from our work at UNCTAD. Victor promised me there are no journalists in the room, so I will share some data from our upcoming, not yet published review of maritime transport. Let me see how this goes. I will now click this little button that says share screen. And yes, I am sure that I want to share. And now I click on the desktop, and you should now be seeing this presentation. And I will do the full screen, and I hope you can all see global developments in maritime transport, BC, DC, and AC. The three parts are about BC, that's before Corona, trends in maritime transport and the container shipping network, long-term trends. Then I will speak about during Corona, shipping in times of pandemic, and after Corona, who knows, after, during, how long that takes, some thoughts about a sustainable future. So let's start with some trends in maritime transport and the container shipping network, some long-term trends. Here comes based on some data from hard data on port traffic, loaded, unloaded. In this case, it's loaded goods. A little video that shows how in the 1970s, more than half of the cargo was liquid cargo, crude oil, other liquid cargo. And then you see how over the years, the dry cargo, which is containers, but also, of course, iron or coal, like exports from Australia, has been growing. From where to where does this cargo go? Very quick, simplified picture here for the short presentation. 1970, the developing countries, which are very much our concern at UNCTAD, actually had a big surplus in their maritime trade. Surplus in terms of tons. They loaded far more volume than they unloaded. And then this has changed. Here's the latest data, the shares today, the share of developing countries as a group in global seaborne trade. So the old scenario was developing countries exported large volumes of raw materials and imported high value but low volume manufactured goods. Today's scenario is that developing countries participate in globalized production. They also import raw materials and also export manufactured goods. Now, this whole concept of developed visa developing countries in shipping is, to say the least, complex. Developing countries here, of course, includes China, which has totally changed its trade structure. Many countries, and here I would include Australia, not whether it's developing or not developing, of course it's developed, it's in the south. It also largely exports raw materials, but the global trend is towards globalized production. That is a bit what I want to say here. So countries import, export different types of raw materials, intermediate goods, and all countries in the world increasingly participate in globalized production. So that leads to the demand for maritime transport. What about the supply? And here I can build on what Mark very nicely presented about some aspects. There he spoke about the seafarers, the flags, the owners. So more and more shipping is being produced globally. And I like to start this with a true story, Hoffmann Shipping. So that's my father was German. The flag of our fleet, which you see in the photo, was registered, was in Antigua and Barbuda. Our freight agent was in Amsterdam. Our seafarers were Polish. The crewing agent was in Cyprus. The cargo we had moved, for example, from Turkey to Canada. We would get fuel in Algeciras, have it insured in a P&I club in the UK, have it repaired in a shipyard in Portugal. Those in the audience, that's how many countries involved in Hoffmann Shipping? Yes, you are right. It's 11 because Captain's favorite drink was from Ireland. So let's go back to some numbers. It's really, Mark gave some more detailed numbers here. We have some, the big picture update. So just 3 countries, China, Korea, Japan, built 92.5% of the ships last year. Owners, yes, still Greece, Japan, China, more than 40% of deadweight tonnage, just 3 countries. The registration, yes, Panama, Liberia, Marshall Island, 40% of deadweight. And in fact, it depends on how you count, whether you call it flag of convenience, open registry, more than 70% of tonnage of the world is registered under a foreign flag. So like where the country of ownership is different from the country of registration. A quick video here how this developed since 1980 with our UNCTAD data. So you can see Liberia was still #1. Then Japan, Greece were still among the top 3, and then they're going down. You see sometime during those years, Marshall Islands will start popping up, coming from down. And some other ship owner at the very beginning, there was the German flag. You see the US flag is going down. UK flag actually has largely foreign owners. And you should also say it's not just UK owners using a foreign flag, but it's also UK flag being used by foreign owners. And here we have it how Marshall Islands, now I could be a race commentator, is overtaking Liberia, and then let us see the very latest, beginning this year, Liberia is back #2. When it comes to the operators, if I take container ships, Maersk, MSC, they don't own about half of their ships, but they operate about 1/3 of the container shipping fleet. Where do ships, when they go, where do they go when they die? They go to the beach, very often in South Asia. More than 90% of ship scrappings, recycling takes place in India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. The more classical financial other services are still in the classical maritime countries, but there too you have China financing Greek ship owners. You have Indian classification society among the top 10. You have P&I club in Korea. So here we see more bit of diversification. Seafarers, it was mentioned, China, Philippines, Indonesia, and then the port operators also more and more. The international operators take concessions and operate ports in other countries. For every country in the world, we have a maritime country profile. With more time, I could have pulled out now where's Australia in this position, but also this seminar was sort of global. So here's a link, and you can see your country's participation in these businesses. Key underlying trend is concentration. It's bigger ships, fewer companies and services. Here we take data from fleet deployment, the average per country just indexed, and you see how ship sizes go up, total fleet deployment goes up, that's in line with the trade, but the level of competition, number of services, number of direct connections is actually going down over the long term. This poses challenges for national port and competition authorities. Australia has done some very interesting work about vertical integration, about the competition authority. So another long, interesting topic. Maybe we have time to discuss. Overall, the network has been expanding, different ways to measure it. Just take the number of ports that are included in the liner shipping network. Long-term trend has been growing. also more hub and spoke, fewer direct services, more with transshipment. And over the last 2 years, or if you take a peak in early 2019, this has been going down. The number of ports has slightly decreased. Partly it could be capacity management, which the shipping lines have been able to manage. It's aligned with some other trends during COVID, but it started actually already a little earlier. So let us go to DC during COVID-19, shipping in times of pandemic. We don't know yet what will be the growth of trade this year, growth of GDP, a lot of nowcast, forecast estimates, but it's bad. It looks really bad. I wanted to share this slide. I find it interesting, important for the shipping sector. It shows that in the long term, trade has been growing faster than the economy. It has also been much more volatile. But if you look over the last 8-9 years, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, yeah, it's 9 already, yeah. 2 of the last 9 years, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, yeah. 2 of the last 9 years, actually trade has grown less than the economy, which has never happened before since we recorded this. Same data in another chart. You see the more recent years, the red dots are below the regression line. So there is some fundamental change. And that started already before COVID, has to do with more trade and services in the GDP, China more sourcing at home, different trends, more protectionism also. And now, of course, there comes the COVID. One more little video, which I like. I hope you can see this well on your screen. So each dot here are the number of port calls, container ship port calls, container ships only, per week, per country. The size is the number of port calls, and the color is whether it is higher or lower than last year, same week. So I hope that's clear. So let's start the little video, and you see how Australia already beginning of the year was red, like fewer port calls, container ship port calls per week than last year. Many countries start turning red in March, April. Some start improving, interestingly, especially China, starting already in June, is back in the green. Most European countries, most American countries are in the red, and this is up to early August data. Now the same data in one chart. This is global container ship port calls last year and this year. The dark blue line is this year and the gray line is last year. Yeah, how do you group what? How do you explain? Long discussion. I will divide this into 2 groups. One group, China. China is already above last year's level. You see Chinese New Year impact and so on in both years. And China is already above last year's levels in terms of container ship port calls. The rest of the world is not quite back. The gap is closing, but it's not quite there yet. So what is the challenge? And it was mentioned also by Mike and previous introductions, the whole challenge, what do we do? We have a policy brief, which is, I think, very interesting. The link is there. You will have the PowerPoint. We go along the supply chain from ships to the port, to leaving the port, to transit, to border crossing, to regulation, to information. The challenge is to keep ports open, ships running, trade flowing, without or with protecting the port workers and the population and the officers. In one of our very early technical notes that we had put out when COVID started, we had said an advice to ports: be careful, don't let the seafarers leave the ship, which is of course not in line with what we all now are very concerned about, which is the crewing crisis. So we took out that bullet point and rather say, dear dockers, help your colleagues, the seafarers, to allow for crew changes. One last point under this item. Very often you will see whether there's like a balance. It's a picture of a balance You have to take a trade-off between facilitating trade and transport and controls. In fact, the specific 10 recommendations we make in our policy brief, and whatever measure you take from the World Trade Facilitation Agreement, they usually achieve both. Electronic payments, advanced ruling, single window, more transparency, automation, dematerialization, digitalization, all these help both protect people from COVID-19 and facilitate trade. Some thoughts about the future. A key point is, of course, digitalization. I think we can learn from containerization. It was developed by the private sector. The box was invented by a truck driver, by the truck company owner, Mr. McLean. And then it became a global standard with an ISO standard. The same, I think we can hope for the digitalization, blockchain solutions. There are many private sector companies involved here, IBM, Maersk and others. It is important to have global standards with involvement of the ISO, CEFAT, World Customs Organization, and so on. Then about the sustainability, you've all seen, heard the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. There's no specific goal just focused on transport, but almost all goals have components from transport. I want to look at one specific aspect here, the negative externalities from shipping: noise, pollution, accidents, oil spills, congestion in ports, CO2 emissions. So who is paying for those externalities today? So let's say global warming, climate change. Who is paying today? Coastal population in Bangladesh, whose lands are flooded, are paying. Investors in the Bahamas, whose properties are devastated by more frequent hurricanes, they have been paying. Farmers in Mali, whose crops fail after another dry season, they are paying. Swiss ski resorts left without snow. So who should pay? The polluter should pay. The polluter should be given three options. Either don't pollute less. Either go slower, use clean fuel, near source, and so on. Clean up, help adapt, filter, build flood walls, or compensate. I'm proud to share there's one document from the IMO that mentions the internalization of externalities, written 25 years ago by this handsome young man at that time. Today, even the private sector is pushing forward. A levy on CO2 is being promoted by private companies. And often it's said, we are not there, it's not possible, we don't know how to do. Technological progress will never be as slow as today. Is it slow? But it will be faster. And the negotiation, ratification, implementation of conventions take time. We need to commit to whatever is the best future technological solution. So I've shared with you some trends about concentration, fewer companies, bigger companies, less competition, challenges here, but also improved connectivity. Some data which I hope you found interesting about shipping in times of pandemic, and some thoughts about a sustainable future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan. Back again here. I would like to thank the panel today, who has presented a quite comprehensive global view of the changes that has taken place over the last few years, the trend, and the impact of COVID-19 on the production and shipping industry as such. Now I'm gonna go through the Q&A session. Prior to do so, I got a range of questions being posed on the Q&A. I will go through one by one. So the first question that I have for Mark is that's come from me actually. You know, the Jan mentioned about high concentration of shipwrecking industry in developing countries like India and Bangladesh. What would you see the role of unions in shaping the policy, just not globally, but in particular context to the countries where those sorts of production now taking place?
Yeah, thanks, Prem. not an area that my union has been directly involved in, but I think reflecting on Jan's, what I take from Jan's presentation is that from cradle to grave, we all have to take responsibility for shipping and shipping's impact. So I can surely foresee a role for unions, not only in shipping but also in shipbuilding. So my sister unions here in Europe wanting to be part of a conversation to make sure that the industry is sustainable throughout throughout a ship's life, from building to being scrapped. And I'm aware, not directly but indirectly, of some of the atrocious conditions that some of those ships are, how those ships are processed and handled on the beaches of India, Bangladesh and Pakistan. So I certainly see a role in us ensuring that there are international measures put in place, efforts to support improved health and safety for the workers involved in this industry. It needs to be better regulated, and there needs to be international cooperation in order to achieve that. So we would be part of that that movement, if you like. And I know it's there, it's evident. I mean, I know there are other organizations, trade union organizations, who are environmental organizations too, NGOs who are actively pursuing that tack.
Thank you so much, Mark. Appreciate it. I got a question on the Q&A from Paul from China, for Mike, if I may. And he's referring to the privatisation of the port in Australia, particularly the Darwin port up in the north. So the question for Mike from Paul is, what is the direction of the coastal reform which is taking place today, which would enable Darwin port to grow as a hub to provide services to Australia and to other Pacific Island nations? Is there a chance for those sorts of shift and reforms to help Darwin to grow larger than what it is today?
Yeah, Prem, there is, as there equally, and I thank Paul for his question, as there equally is, I think, the potential role for a lot of regional ports around the country. I mean, it's fair to say that Darwin is not being as strongly utilised as it could be, given its proximity to Asia and the infrastructure, rail and road infrastructure that do connect with Darwin. I mean, there's a lot of political heat about Darwin, but it's not until you actually go there and you see the number of international organisations that are actually working cooperatively on the port that you realise this is no different from any other port around the country. They are simply trying to lift trade. If the government were successful in getting their current round of proposed reforms through, it would be a realistic appreciation of the fact that there are certain types of vessels, that there are no Australian registered vessels in that class or doing those routes. And therefore, if you were to liberalise those consistent with the government's proposed reforms, again, recognising that there are no Australian registered vessels in those categories anyway, then that could potentially be a significant shot in the arm for ports like Darwin and ports like Townsville, for example, and its proximity right up the north of Queensland, and what that means equally ports like Geraldton in Western Australia. There are opportunities there. Just that move alone would then make it such that international vessels could start to look at calling into Darwin and others, and then that would then hopefully create an environment where trade would start to grow and people would get a job.
Thank you. Mike, you stay there. I got another question for you, and it's a question from Chris, and it is a very long question, so it's a bit of background there, so I'll read it out for you. How well has in the context of the EU organised thinking and is currently supporting investment into the digital transportation strategy. And some of it is about seeing shipping and coastal shipping to be the primary focus for us to improve our connectivity in a better way. So Australia has nothing like, for example, motorways of the seas, where informations and drivers allow freight flow to run smoothly. So the question here from Chris is, how can the whole of Australia match that level of integrated thinking where land-based transport system is well integrated with blue ocean, blue highways type of paradigm shift that you mentioned earlier? Are we really there in terms of adopting such a radical approach for improving supply chain efficiency? What do you think, Mike, on that?
Prem, I think Chris has got a very good question, and that is the approach that we take to the debate in relation to coastal shipping alone, and that is one of the efficiencies. We don't own a ship, we don't own a train, and we don't own a truck. Therefore, we are ecumenical. It's more a question of what's in the national interest rather than self-interest. And in this country, let's be honest, the rail and road sector have very, very loud voices. We have very few domestically based representatives of the shipping industry that can advocate on behalf of shipping, and therefore it seems that rail and road are heard more regularly. We find we are different from Europe. The largest, 80-85% of our people are based along the coastline, and the majority of those along the east coast. We don't have rivers, so we can't use rivers to barge vessels up and down the coast. I am interested, and I have raised this before with a number of studies, both government and otherwise, whether the Great Barrier Reef would provide, by its very name, a barrier or some protection to barging along the coast of Queensland to try to use barging as an efficient means of moving transport. The sad reality is we are a big country. We are disparate in where our communities are based right around the coastline. And we have a fixation with rail and road, and you only have to look at the investment that goes into particularly rail, but not just rail and road, and then ask yourself the question, where is the corresponding investment into the shipping sector? Of course, there is none. Indeed. Absolutely none.
Indeed.
And the point that Mark makes earlier about having a heart and a bit of compassion, Australians love to pat themselves on the back when it comes to compassion and understanding. But when AMSA tell us that we've had a 100% increase in the number of suicides or people disappearing from vessels off our coastline in the last 9 months, you'd think that would rate a significant mention. It doesn't get a mention at all, nor does the plight of international seafarers stuck on vessels for more than 14 months and the concerns and stresses are placed on them. It doesn't rate a mention, sadly.
Can I bring Mark onto the discussion here to provide a bit of a European Union perspective? Have they managed to actually integrate the entire Europe, and does it actually work properly? And can we learn some lessons from EU and implement them as a policy in Australia? Mark?
Well, it was mention of motorways of the sea that piqued my interest, which is why I asked if I could come in on this question. And I just wanted to pick up also and thank Mike for highlighting the importance of the national interest. I mean, we've heard about the importance of coastal shipping, the Blue Highway, how important it could be to Australia, to coastwise traffic. But I think it's really important that is seen through the optic of it being driven by national policy, strategic, sovereign capability, maritime resilience, and so any policy intervention need to drive those objectives. And if you look at motorways of the sea, I would humbly suggest that motorways of the sea seems to have no connection or joined up approach to the strategic needs and objectives of European shipping policy. You know, do we want to move cargo from trucks on the roads of Europe that are owned and being run, driven, and employing European truck drivers, and put them on flag of convenience vessels employing third world seafarers on exploitative terms and conditions in Europe? Now, that as a policy it's utterly senseless. So, you know, that's where I think there's a sort of vacuum in and no joined up thinking. What are the goals? How do they serve your interests? How do we deliver those interests and make sure everything is in the conversation is linked up? That would be my perspective on this.
Thank you very much, Mark. That's great insight from an EU perspective. I got a quick question from Jan. In 2013, the Belt and Road Initiative, in those days, One Belt, One Road initiative was launched by the Chinese government. And the intention behind the initiative is to improve connectivity of the Chinese heartland with Europe. Now, you mentioned in your presentation the connectivity of the countries are actually not improving or not improving enough. Do you think, Jan, with the Belt and Road Initiative and the infrastructure built around the world in multiple countries, investment of trillions of dollars going in BRI participating countries, will connectivity in a global sense be improving? What is your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure if my microphone is on. I hope you can see and hear me. Yes, we have found when we just look at container shipping connectivity, where we have our different indices per country, per port, bilateral, that countries and ports that are included, and once they're included in the BRI, there is a measurable improvement in these indicators on average. So that's a simple answer to your straightforward question. I wanted to link this to 2 points that were discussed earlier. One was this issue of becoming a hub port and Darwin and connecting and so on. Having more transshipment services in a port is actually not always that interesting for the port, because transshipment is very, very competitive. It doesn't pay much. Ship owners, carriers, they change their structures very quickly, very easily. However, we do find that countries' ports that are better connected, for example, because they become transshipment ports, they do benefit from it for their importers and exporters. So in that sense, if you get additional services connecting to your country, your port, due to transshipment, your own importers and exporters can also benefit from this. So that is actually something that is not so often highlighted. The ports, I want more ships, it's more business. It's actually also good for the importer exporter, but of course it's a very, very competitive, and everybody wants to be the hub port. Sorry, and one quick last thought. There was a discussion on the cabotage, which is it's true. The thing is, also in the European context, if maritime, be it roll on, roll off, or whatever service goes parallel to land, same distance and so on, it really becomes competitive only over a certain long distance. There are some numbers, estimates. Where it is competitive in Europe is when it cuts shorter, like from Spain across to Italy, or from Spain across to UK or to Scandinavia. So that's where short sea shipping becomes more competitive, which of course in Australia is a bit more difficult. I would like to recommend the case of New Zealand for container shipping. New Zealand liberalized to some extent cabotage, and if it is an international service that connects the two islands that afterwards goes elsewhere, international carriers with foreign flag, call them flag of convenience, with foreign seafarers. Of course, there are two islands, but then you would have Filipino seafarers competing with Australian truck drivers, which is politically probably not so easy. But this is an area where the moment you have two ports connected in any case, why not allow for efficiency, for CO2 emissions, for few accidents on the road? Why not allow this carrier, which can be Hapag-Lloyd, Costco, whatever, Maersk, why not allow them to also move Australian coastal shipping on that route? A bit provocative. I know it's complicated, but very specific, under very specific conditions, there are some good examples for this.
Thank you very much, Jan. I got another question for Mark. What are some of the key challenges for seafarers and the supply of labor to shipping highlighted by COVID-19?
We cannot
Sorry,
hear
I've
Mark.
just unmute. There was a slight delay on that. Well, COVID-19 has presented CIFRs with a whole raft of challenges, and some of them have been touched on today, but the rush by many countries to lock down their country, to lock down access to their ports, to prevent shipping going about its business in support of the global supply chain has been hugely challenging for the seafarers who work on those ships, denied the opportunity to return home, for their colleagues to replace them on the vessels, has created what the International Transport Workers Federation now estimates to be sort of 400,000 seafarers trapped at sea. If you think every month, typically before COVID, BC COVID, as Jan has coined the phrase, you would be looking at typically 100,000 seafarers routinely joining and leaving vessels. So for every month that this crisis continues and countries restrict their ability to move, the problem is going to get worse and worse and worse. And we could be looking at close to 1 million seafarers either stuck at sea or stuck at home by the time we get to Christmas. So that's a massive, massive issue. So what else flows from that? Unable to access medical and welfare services ashore, even for non-COVID related issues. Mike has mentioned that. Mike's also mentioned that we've had countless reports of suicides due to COVID-19. We think it's difficult to say for sure at this stage. Fights have broken out on ships. We've had seafarers refusing to work, demanding repatriation, and I compliment AMSA for taking a determined position in that in terms of Australian port state control. If ships don't have a repatriation plan, then they intervene. Others, I believe, are starting to notice that and take suit. And I think port state control does have a role to take some decisive action to unlock the crew change crisis. Others have mentioned this already, and the extent to which this is widely known is encouraging. But seafarers can serve up to 11 months as a maximum under the minimum conditions in the ILO Maritime Labour Convention. But we are now looking at many seafarers serving 17 months or more. Now, I am a former seafarer, and I can tell you that the impact of a short delay to your return home after your period at sea, whether it's 2 months, 3 months, 4, 5, I was doing 6 months back in the day, is horrendous. It is emotionally and mentally incredibly stressful. So I just want you to reflect and think about the impact of working 17 months on a ship, and the uncertainty is the key thing. It's not necessarily always the length. It's not knowing when you're going to be relieved, or constantly being told you're about to be relieved, and then plans are changing just like that. And you can unpack your bags. The flights have been cancelled. The port has changed its position. So this is a humanitarian crisis of huge impact and significance. And I really do hope, following last week's UN General Assembly, and there was a key side event with all the major international stakeholders all singing with one voice, and as I mentioned in my presentation, banks and finance houses and global corporations stepping in to join the call for solutions to the crew change crisis. I'm hoping it will be rapidly resolved. I remain optimistic.
Prem, if I can just make a comment following Jan's earlier observation with regards to the transport workers. Having spoken to the Transport Workers Union, they equally are concerned about the well-being of their members, particularly doing these long-haul journeys. For us, it's not unusual, it's not unimaginable for a truck driver to pick up a container, or if he's on a B-double, pick up two containers at Brisbane and drive all the way up the Bruce Highway to Mackay, or even further, a trip well over 1,000 kilometres to drop them, to turn around unladen, to drive all the way back and pick up two more and drive back there again. They equally have concerns of an ageing workforce, and they are quite right in seeing that there are less and less young people prepared to come into long distance work. There are more options available to them than there were for past generations, and they were basically sort of dragooned into truck driving because it was the only option, or it's what their father or their grandfather did. The younger people just are not prepared to do it. So we have been able to touch a chord with the TWU, Transport Workers Union, as well, that this is about the well-being of their workers, and it's not about doing their jobs, getting rid of their jobs, because what will happen is we will, with coastal shipping, move the container from Brisbane to Mackay, make that 1,000-kilometre journey, but it's still got to be picked up by a truck driver and taken that last mile. So what we're doing is giving truck drivers an opportunity to go home to their families of a night time and work consistently from ports like Mackay and other regional ports and live in a wonderful community and not have to struggle with the burden of living in a capital city, making a 1,000-kilometre each way journey. So there's wins for everyone in this. We just need the government to start to focus in on something that currently is before their horizon. Once the ship goes out of sight, it goes out of mind. We've got to keep it in their mindset.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. I got a question on the Q&A from Wintai for Jan. In the aftermath of COVID-19 and increasing pressure to promote sustainability in practices, what do you, you're presenting on TAD, of course, see the future of autonomous shipping?
Yeah, it's we have some thoughts on it, but honestly, for me it's a very technical question, and really I don't really have a view. Very generally, I said technological progress will never be as slow as today. I think they will come probably faster than is now forecasted. But having myself also long ago worked for the IMO and collaborating with the IMO until for safety and security reasons, this is really permitted and approved and checked, it will take a long time. So that's a very general answer. I'm sorry, I can't be more specific.
Mark or Mike, would you like to contribute and try to answer the question on automation of shipping?
I mean, Mark's a lot closer to it, particularly in proximity, but also with the unions. But the reality for us here is that we're so far away, in a true sense, from the big decisions being made in shipping that it'll be some time before we see anything of that investment down in our waters. That being said, we watch with a very close eye, you know, some of the other areas that are now starting to come under the focus, such as remote tug, remote pilotage as well, which are all part of a bigger picture that COVID has identified the risk, and just whether in 2020 continuation of that risk is acceptable.
Thanks. Another question is related to, as you know, the increasing size of the vessel. Will Australian ports be able to accommodate larger ships in the near future? I mean, we do have limitation in terms of capacity. Is there any plan for us to expand our infrastructure to accommodate larger ships that are becoming inevitably important as we see the future?
Yeah, thank you. I assume that is directed at me rather than Mark and Jan, but I would welcome their answer.
Yeah.
Look, Australian ports, particularly container ports, have always invested in growing global ship fleets in terms of the capacity of our ports to be able to deal with them. It was something that in 2019, the Infrastructure Australia, in its IPL, its infrastructure priority list, raised concerns about this very issue for the future. I then wrote to them. Sadly, there were a couple of inaccuracies in regards to the information that they had been given, and I said the reputation of this organisation is paramount, and I felt it was important to at least spell out those inaccuracies. And to their credit, they went back and checked it and said, no, you're right. We do need to fix that. We do need to correct the record. So the record currently does acknowledge that Australian ports have had a history and will continue to do so of making the necessary investment to meet the challenge when it comes. Whether we see that in the next 10 years, who knows what COVID's going to do in terms of ship size and the changes that will occur there. But be assured that if dredging needs to occur, investment in infrastructure needs to occur to keep our capital city ports operating. We're an importing nation as much as we export, and it'll happen.
Jan has alluded this earlier that in the shipping and maritime industry, they're going to be bigger ships and fewer companies. With that combination, which basically indicates some sort of monopoly of the shipping industry, what sort of concern do you see that might emerge as an outcome of that monopolistic structure of the maritime industry? Will that affect the level of competition? Will it affect the efficiency? Will it affect the deployment of labor? Do you see that as a major concern for the industry? To any member of the panel, please.
Yeah, if it's okay, I try to come in. I try to wave on the big ship issue, and that is very much in what you just said. If you want to become a hub port, yes, then it makes a lot of sense to try to attract big ships, because these then attract the feeder connections and so on and so forth. If your cargo, your own import-export cargo volume is constant, then actually in many cases we have already reached diseconomies of scale. On the sea side, yes, bigger ships are more energy efficient, and you have whether you have a 20,000 TEU or 10,000 TEU, you have the same number of seafarers. Yes, you have economies of scale. But having one big ship every 2 days, or half as big a ship every day, is much better for the port to have more frequent calls. You need to dredge less, you need smaller cranes, you need to have more frequent connect. I mean, so, and we have done some empirical study for some case studies where we looked at the different components of connectivities, competition, direct services, total deployment, and so on. And all these components are associated statistically with more trade. The only one that is not correlated with more trade are bigger ships. So in that sense, I'm a bit skeptical. There's a lot of pressure, and I don't want to generalize, but at times I feel that ports are put under a lot of pressure from the shipping lines and the alliances. Please dredge, buy bigger cranes and so on. If you look at the total door-to-door logistics, total benefits to the country, it may not really be worth it.
All right, thank you very much, Jan. Anybody else wants to contribute to that questions about the industry being moving on to a very monolithic and monopolistic structure? Any concern? Look, that you see?
I would, Prem, if I could just say, I don't see any benefits for seafarers. I only see evidence of downside for seafarers, and clearly, I was going to point to the point, and Jan's made the point again about the competitive aspects and about the cost effectiveness. But I think it must be worrying for policymakers, regulators, governments, competition authorities, when a handful, literally a handful of global container operators have such power in the marketplace. And when we think about vertical integration and the impact on the ports industry, public investment, say not necessarily in Australia, as Mike has pointed out, there are no publicly owned ports in Australia, but in Europe the experience is different, where this is driving the necessity for public investment into ports to respond to the ever-growing size of these ships, and that's presenting some real challenges for those ports, those other ports, the non-hub ports, the ports that can't handle these big ships, and impacting massively in Europe, at least, on the working conditions of those who work in those ports and rely on those ports for work.
I think let's just conscious of the time. Just the last question and last thought. I think, where do you see the future of maritime and shipping industry, say in the next 5 to 10 years? As you see, the industry is really getting into automation mode, and the labor deployment is gradually becoming minimum. And you mentioned about the challenges of recruiting younger workforce into the industry. If automation be the key driver of and transformator of the industry, then people, young and talented people would not see that as a great opportunity unless they have the technical or digital skills to do the work.
Well, I think it's not a great picture that's being painted for those considering a career in shipping, which often leads to a career in maritime and in the wider cluster, as previous speakers have mentioned during their presentation. So the idea, these headlines that are generated in all the big broadsheets that robots are taking over and we're going to have fully autonomous shipping is not a message that I'm willing to accept. In the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see some small localized projects of, yes, piloted automated towage, possibly coastwise traffic. We've already got ships being built in Norway and the UK, and others are doing, some investment and research and development in that area. But for international shipping, the cornerstone of the global economy, I don't see this being significant over the next 5 to 10 years. I think what's really, really important for the conversation, the longer development piece, is the involvement of the workers that will be effective. Make sure that that we socialize this discussion, we prepare seafarers of today for the future of tomorrow, and give young people some inspiration that this is an industry that can speak to their aspirations about sustainability, because it's a great industry. Let me make that final point. It's a fantastic industry to be involved in.
Absolutely, Mark. Prem, I can only talk on an Australian perspective. You look at the freight task, the anticipated growth in the freight task over the coming years. It's not going to get any smaller, it's going to get bigger and bigger. And whilst automation will move into those more repetitive roles where automation does its best work, that will create opportunities elsewhere. And it's not all going to be a case of everyone doing coding. It's going to be a case about people being involved in logistics, understanding supply chains, understanding how they can get the best out of technology that it's there. The very things that you guys are teaching your students. It's not the repetitive work that you're looking for, it's for the future work. And Mark's got it. It's an exciting industry. And you saw my history before I came in here. My biggest regret is I didn't come in here earlier. I really regret I didn't come into this sector earlier.
Thanks, Mark. I think I'm running out of time. Let me conclude. Today, I actually learned a lot. It is just an amazing discussion, and the conversation that we had today, and the presentation was really amazing. The global picture you painted today was just remarkable for all of us to develop that understanding. A lot of this data that Jan presented is really telling us the latent and underlying patterns of what's happening with the shipping industry. A union perspective on a number of issues that we have today is just amazing. So I can see, as you guys have highlighted, the importance of the blue economy is emerging. The need for us to look for global solution is important for all of us. The importance, the ability to learn the importance of the shipping industry is now growing. And we really need to look into the closed supply chain, looking at the end-to-end supply chain rather than just focusing on one particular part. And it does have impact by the globalization of the production system being really fragmented around the world, and so on so forth. And need to see the development of the national data hub, which is we've been asking it for a very long time, and Victor and myself has started a small project within the group to actually collect and collate that type of data. Technological challenges and also the opportunity for us to be digitally innovative is something that we need to really look forward, and relying heavily on automation, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. These are the technologies we really cannot overlook, and these are the technologies that will have immense and disruption into the supply chain. So once again, I would like to thank the panel member, particularly Mark and Jan, our overseas participants, who had really provided a very insightful thought leadership on the topic today. Thank you very much. I can't help. I'd like to ask the audience to join me in thanking all the panel members today. Thank you very much.